Dear church, let's talk missions with Rusty Brown. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Excited to have Rusty Brown with us. Rusty and his family work in the mission field, but specifically in Ecuador, Cuenca, Ecuador, and the Oldham Lane Church of Christ, where I preach, supports their family in that work. And Rusty has been here, preached for us Sunday night, did a little presentation at a luncheon on Sunday as well. And of course, if you're watching this after the fact, that was August 1st. But, and I thought, I want to have Rusty on. I want to get him on the podcast and let's talk a little bit about missions. Let's talk about Ecuador specifically and the work there. So Rusty, thanks, man, for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit tell everybody about your family, about Brittany, your 3 beautiful kids, and kind of family life.
All right. Well, family life, I guess, is particularly in Ecuador, or just in general,
just
how
in
we
general.
met, or
yeah, just I know you guys are Harding grads, So.
Yeah, my parents had gone out to Colorado to start a congregation in Highlands Ranch, and Brittany and I met because her congregation invited our congregation to do a New Year's potluck and worship and all this together, and we took notice of each other, and at the same time, her sister was making sure that something was going to happen there. But when she was still in high school, I was at Harding, and so I was like, well, I can't take this too seriously just yet. It just seems we're too far apart and all this. Right. But she ended up coming to Harding, and first day they had her, Harding always celebrates the different states and countries and everything available. Sure. And they had her carrying the Colorado flag. And I go, hey, look, I told my room, I was like, that's the girl I was talking to you about, man. And then all of a sudden words of my brother came back. That was, if you find a good girl at Harding, get her quick. They don't stay on the market. Yeah. So I was like, I gotta call.
You gotta move fast.
Yeah, and I didn't have her number or anything like that. So I think for her it's a little bit creepy, but I went and looked up on the, at the time you could just go find, look up anybody and find their on campus number. But I called her up and asked her to go have a coffee with me and my friends, and she absolutely hates coffee, but she came anyway. So I think it was history after that. Yeah. But we dated, my senior year was her freshman year. And so we had 1 year together, 3 years apart. And I was working in Denver, went and helped start a congregation in Knoxville, and then got married back in Denver with family, went to China for 2 years, and then back to Knoxville again. and since then, I've had 3 kids and now 6 years in Ecuador, and we're loving it.
Love your kids, especially. So you have Peyton, who's the oldest, a boy who is how old?
He's 8.
He's 8. So Lydia is in the middle, is 6. And then Logan is youngest, he's 4. And Lydia and I have always had a connection. Mm-hmm. She was talking my ear off the other night, and I certainly was fine with that. Talk a little bit about raising a family in South America, Ecuador specifically. What is it like versus America? Kind of what are some of the cultural challenges? You might even tell us a little bit about the dynamics of Ecuador, climate, geography, all that kind of stuff for those who don't know.
Yeah, sure. And oddly, I might actually have to come at it from reverse, because I myself was raised on the mission field.
Yeah, I think we probably need to say that too. You were raised most of your life in Venezuela.
Right. Yeah. My parents were missionaries in Caracas for 18, almost 19 years.
Wow.
And so I was born in Caracas, and spent 12 years solidly there, and so for me, definitely I had a different experience growing up as well. But then I did have my high school years in the U.S., and so it's kind of a mixed batch, and a lot of the differences between raising them here and raising them there, I actually see through the eyes of my wife. And she'll notice it. But even she, on this trip, started realizing all the things that our kids didn't know about being American.
Like,
and according to them, being in school, all their friends would remind them regularly that, you are American,
Right.
And so they're made to feel that, they're not fully Ecuadorian, but then, something that we all went through as well is, living there, you feel American. Coming here, you realize you're not.
You're not exactly American.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's these.
You don't have a home, really.
Yeah. I mean, our kids, this trip, realized what a dishwasher really was. And it blew their mind.
Really?
Because, there's we have a friend that has a dishwasher there, but it's just not common.
Your kids are the dishwasher there.
Exactly. Yeah, well, I'm working on that. but yeah, just simple things like that, and leaving doors open because they've never had air conditioning. And so
you don't have air conditioning.
No, well, there's no need where we are because we're, people often ask, is it about this temperature? Because it's hot now in Abilene. Yeah. Is it this temperature in Ecuador? And I say, oh no, we're nearly 9,000 feet above sea level, and so we're sitting.
It's never this temperature.
No, it's between air temperature 60 to 65 all year long. Okay, and we'll get hot sunny days, and the that radiant heat makes the difference. But where we live, there's really not much
Andes Mountains. Is it tropical rainforest kind of below you? Where in relation geography, where are you guys at as far as people probably can get out a map and see where Ecuador is, but in Ecuador itself, kind of the Cuenca, where exactly is that located?
In Cuenca, it's pretty lush. Of course, we're kind of on the western side where it's a little more lush. On the eastern side is almost starts looking like Southern California.
Oh,
so it changes over a small space. The everything changes quite a bit,
right?
And so many of the people who like to retire in Cuenca actually end up living on that eastern side because they want to be a little bit warmer,
Right.
Whereas we like being a little. One, we were going to work on the west side anyway, but we appreciate that we're closer to those mountains that are right there.
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, Ecuador really has a great variety of climates and stuff because they've got, on the far eastern side, you've got just straight up Amazon. Okay. In the middle, you've got high east, these Andes mountains where just 20 minutes from our house, you look like you're in the Scottish Highlands.
Oh, okay. And that is pretty.
Right. And then you go down to the coast and you can, you've got everything from dry desert looking stuff to big farmlands. And then of course, even further out west, you get the Galapagos Islands. So it's just, it's a neat place to be. We haven't got to explore all of it just yet, but looking forward to it. So far, our kids think that all the fun stuff's outside of Ecuador because we come here for every vacation, and they're like, "Yeah, America's where you go for vacation." I was like, "Oh no, Americans go to Ecuador for vacation. You just haven't done it yet."
Yeah, you're just already there. So, how big is Cuenca, the city that y'all are in?
Downtown, main area, about 150,000 people, but the metropolitan area all around it, the different suburbs, you might call them, they call them parochials or whatever, but the whole area that Cuenca governs is about 700,000 people.
Okay. And what has been the biggest challenge as far as maybe adjusting? When you first got there, I know you grew up in Venezuela, but maybe for your kids, or what has been the biggest adjustment, the biggest challenge in settling there?
I'd have to say, well, I feel a lot of the adjustments we might have had to have made were done having lived in China.
Oh, yes.
For my wife, at least, she's like, oh man, after China, Ecuador's easy.
So you guys lived in China. Right. I keep skipping ahead.
Not a problem.
It really is a great a part of this story that we need to tell. So you've been a part of mission work even in the United States in planting churches, but also you went to China for 2 years.
Yes.
And so that really set you up well for Ecuador. Maybe you appreciate Ecuador a little more. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Well, we definitely appreciated China to a great degree. At the same time, my wife kind of wanted to get out before the 3rd year because it seemed that's when everyone really got their heavy culture shock. She's like, I'd like to leave with good memories. Right. And at the same time, the people we taught were doing well. The school was kind of looking to change locations. So it just seemed like a decent time to move on. And we had the church in Knoxville, asking us to come back. And so, but yeah, there definitely were a lot more cultural differences in China. And so getting to Ecuador felt a lot better. But then sometimes in those situations, you have the culture shock can sneak up on you a little more. I mean, it always kind of does because you get to somewhere and you don't usually go to somewhere you hate. You go to somewhere you love.
Sure.
And then you expect that you're going to love everything about it. And then when these things sneak up that you just don't see coming, it'll hit you. It'll surprise you. It'll bother you. Why are they ruining this place for me? It's their place.
Exactly.
And so there's definitely cultural differences. And something that surprised me or caught me off guard is that being in the mountains of Cuenca, the more Andes area, there's certain cultural differences amongst them that I would have identified more with an Asian culture than what I would consider a Latin culture.
Really?
Because most of my experience in Latin American countries had been what you might call some of the more coastal cultures.
Okay.
Most of Venezuela, even if you're inland, has a very what you might call coastal culture. It's
Right.
that for Americans, maybe the difference between the Colorado or Colorado folk and the California folk, or or Appalachian people and
Southern, northern. Yeah.
You get coastal versus mountain, and there's certain cultural differences there, and the way it manifests itself amongst those in the Andes regions, it didn't feel Latin to me, and it caught me a bit off guard. I'm like, I wasn't expecting this, and but thankfully, I'd had some experience with these different mentalities and the different ways to approach life and situations and difficulties, and so it did take some adjusting to come at things both from the perspectives I understood and the perspectives I'm trying to understand through their eyes, and try and find the best solution in many of these situations, giving suggestions that are for them outside the box, but for me inside the box, and at the same time thinking outside my box into what would possibly be their boxes.
Sure.
But all of it, I feel, is a good practice. And
do you feel like Brittany has, because I know you growing up in Venezuela, probably the adjustment was a little less, but do you feel like that y'all are settled, that, you're a part of the Ecuadorian culture and almost native now? Or do you just always feel like you're an American transplanted to Ecuador?
I think I haven't really had that conversation with her lately, but I do feel that, because even when we first got there, and like I said, it could have been the pre-culture shock thing, but she, as far as I can tell, never really had any big culture shock. Yeah. She was just kind of rolling with the punches and doing really well, and just little things would come up every now and then.
Sure.
But yeah, for me, from the moment I got there, a lot about it felt like home.
Yeah.
And then as things would come up that would make me feel maybe out of place for a little bit, and until I could get adjusted or fully understand it.
Sure.
She's had similar situations. Obviously for her, the language barrier is still a bit. She'd studied in high school, but never really, it wasn't like this whole, I'm going to go live in Latin America and I'm going to be fluent before I get there.
Right.
That wasn't a thing. And so
is she now?
And now fluent, I don't know, but she can defend herself, as they would say. That's a saying down there is, well, she defends herself. So she easily gets out and about, makes all of her purchases, and she can carry on a conversation. But as she would say, she tops out about 45 minutes, and then her brain's shot. Yeah, she just can't carry on any longer. and then even then, there's so many. We don't realize the ways in which we can express ourselves. Yeah. And the sayings that help us to do so. And when you're studying, you're kind of studying linearly. Yeah. And you're getting one way to say something. But there's
lingo, there's slang.
Right. So catching the way they say so many different ways, and the richness of a language ends up becoming an obstacle for her. Yeah. But she's done very well in getting to understand all of it and coming along. But from what she's saying she loves the trip here, but she's like, I'm already kind of missing going back.
Well, good. That's a good
She'd like
sign.
to go back.
Yeah,
so
that's a good sign.
It definitely, and the kids love being here, but then they love getting back as well. So thankfully it's all gone very smoothly,
it's adjusted
very nicely
well.
for us.
Good.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the work in Ecuador. So when you first moved there, I'm sure you did some research and all that. When you first get there, what's day one? I mean, like, what's the strategy? What's the, what are you thinking? How do I get this off the ground? Where do I start? Do I just, start walking around with a megaphone preaching the gospel? I mean, what do I do? What was your thought process going in?
Okay. Well, I've definitely been in, helping scenarios for those that were just, first on the ground kind of thing. Right. I'd gotten to work just on shorter trips in Barinas in Venezuela when that work first got started. Okay. And it was more like that. In Cuenca, the first congregation had been established in, I think, 1975. Okay. And so there were Christians there already. Gotcha. And there was the group we were particularly going to work with was where, and a sister from Venezuela that was originally Ecuadorian had moved back, and she had, begged my dad to come visit and all this kind of stuff. And then when he went, he told me about it. And as we're looking at cities we'd possibly want to work in, we visit there and just loved it. And loved the church, loved the place, loved everything.
Okay.
And so when we got there, we were really, everyone was asking, well, who's your mission team? And I was like, well, my mission team's already there. We're just catching up, because
Right.
we were partnering up with a local congregation. So it was a bit different in that respect, that we weren't just necessarily breaking the new ground as much as we were coming to
got to build up
what
was already there.
Right. And what I had been made aware of both, in my first visit and getting to know it was that I could see there was a lot of potential in the city, but there seemed to just be stagnating.
Yeah.
And they were working hard, but we weren't working together.
Yeah.
And there was territorial issues over congregations and things like that I hadn't experienced in Caracas.
So there was more than one congregation there when you got there.
There were two congregations, one that was kind of a little more central, and the other one that had gone to the very center of the city to start, and then got to purchase the property way on the outside.
Okay.
That now is finally becoming part of the city.
Yeah.
And so it was, a different dynamic. And we had I came there expressly with the goal, having spoken to the leaders of the church there, that I was wanting to help plant another congregation still, and to be, working with them both for evangelistic purposes, but also for raising up, a team to go and start something new. And at the same time, with that goal of seeing that this be, that as a church, we don't see just my congregation's growth as the goal, but the citywide membership, the kingdom growth as the goal.
So do you go in as the preacher at this church? I mean,
I did not. Well, and they don't like having a preacher.
Oh, okay. They like to pass it around.
They preach,
yeah,
but they like what you would call a revolving pulpit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they have elders, I guess.
They did at the original congregation, and then the exact how it happened, because it happened before I got there, but they just had named people kind of running leadership roles, but the eldership was not as it had been. I think those two that had qualified had passed away or something. And, and so at the moment we're still, going through that, because
you're kind of coming in as a consultant, as a
right. And I just, as they would say, another evangelist, just another person coming in to put my shoulder into the work and get it going.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's what you've been doing for 6 years.
Well, 2 years at that congregation.
Okay.
And then after 2 years, we had a small group that we felt was ready to be able to provide the strength we needed to open a new congregation.
Okay.
And so we went and used a building that they had. There was a Bible Institute from previously, but had gone 8-9 years just kind of sitting there.
Yep.
And so we had to wash it up, clean it up, paint it up, and started meeting there.
Okay.
And the Lord's blessed us really well, and it's a great location being in the center.
Right.
And so we're already 3 years in. I guess we were 3 years at the other church and then 3 years in this one. But yeah, so the new congregation now, in that one, I've definitely stepped more into a leadership role.
Gotcha.
Along with two other guys that came with us and another guy that stepped up, and so it's a different dynamic, because before, definitely just lending a hand and respecting the leadership they had, whereas here it's kind of stepping in a little more and having I guess paid my dues in the culture. Right. At this trying to respect them as much as possible, but at the same time give certain suggestions of things that from outside the box might work a little better.
Well, I wanted to ask you that because I've done some mission work, not to the extent that you have anywhere close, but been to Mexico City 4 times, El Salvador, some other places. And one of the things that I've noticed is there's 2 different approaches, at least. There's probably more than that, but the 2 that I've noticed is, going over there and trying to make the church indigenous, so that it can stand on its own. And then you also, within that, maybe or separate or apart, you see folks come in and they want to Americanize what's there.
Right.
And that seems to be rather tenuous. Doesn't seem to go well. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, how do you function within their culture while still trying to establish the church that Christ is head of and that he established, that, you see in Scripture. Because I figure you can kind of get pretty, you can kind of lose your influence, I guess, if you come in there and just try to say, no, you're doing it all wrong, do it like an American does.
Right. Yeah, for sure. There's, and that's something, I think it's a constant thing you have to ask yourself, because for me, I would definitely have, I'm not going to, there's no way to deny I would have an American influence for sure.
Sure.
But at the same time, the church in Venezuela definitely had different expectations than it did in the U.S. And so I have both the Venezuelan one and the American one, and then the Ecuadorian influences expectations are oftentimes different from both of those.
Sure.
And so sometimes you have to stop for a second and go, okay, so I've had this affirmed in two different cultures, and yet not in this one. And is this something that's of Christ, or is this something that's of man? And it's just a constant, I think, anywhere you are, regardless of whether, you could call it a mission work or call it a local work, there's that need to assess, is this of Christ or is this of man?
Yeah.
And it's probably the trickiest thing, I think, in any work is
I
discerning those differences, and how can I make, because there's a need to address that which is of man. I mean, there's hurts, there's preconceived notions, there's, all kinds of things. And people, those who look to criticize Scripture will even criticize things Jesus said or did as not being universally true, and they're missing the point that he's having to work in a very limited context. You know, the mustard seed's not the smallest seed in the world, but it was the smallest seed they knew
for them.
And so there's these issues of you have to work within the context,
absolutely,
but you have to very clearly have understood the goals that God has for us, where God wants His church to go, and so. In dealing with that, there's all these trip ups. And
I was going to ask, do you have a specific example where you kind of had a bit of butting of heads, or where you kind of had to address something that was more of man and not of Christ, where you had to come in and maybe it caused a little bit of consternation or anything like that?
Well, probably my favorite example actually wasn't mine, so I don't know if I should use that one or not.
No, go ahead.
But I was made aware there was another congregation there that, as you might, I don't know how much everyone's heard, but there's a general idea that Latin America is a little more loose on time than North America, and definitely more than like a German culture, And so, overall there's a little bit of a laxness and getting started on time and things like that. But at the same time, I would say the Ecuadorians are a little more aware than the Venezuelans were. Okay. And wanting to do so. And there's certain ones that I think dream of being German. And this one brother, he fought tooth and nail, but at one of the congregations said, no, we need to start shutting the doors. When, like I think it was 5 minutes after worship started, just shut the doors, and those who come can't come. Yeah. And there were people showed up with visitors and were turned away.
Oh, wow.
and so, you can say, okay, well, this is a cultural thing, and maybe the culture needs to change, and we need to be punctual and all this. But I got, my first thing that came to mind when I heard that was thinking of Paul's, when he was talking about a different topic, but he's talking about speaking in tongues. And well, what if someone comes in off the street? Yeah. Well, you don't have to worry about that. The door was locked,
not a problem.
Right. And so, you would think that's an issue that the Bible didn't talk about, but, there's scriptures that, it might be somewhat indirectly, but there's still that expectation or that understanding that someone might wander in and that door is going to be open.
Yes.
Always. We're not, it's not for this, we need to, sterilize our worship service and shut those doors,
or make it more American,
right? And for him, I don't know if he would have thought of it as American or not, but he thought of it as this is part of the respect we need for God, which is a very good concern. We need to approach God with the holiness. And one of the brothers down there recently gave a great lesson on all the attempts to get the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, the failed attempts, and then when it finally got there, and no one died, David's just full of joy, and so entering the presence of the Lord is not something we do lightheartedly. No. We need to have a great respect But at the same time, as in trying to approach it with great respect, am I approaching it with the respect that God has, with the respect that man has?
Yes.
And I feel that this is where, one of the brothers did kind of step in the wrong direction when God was expecting, no, be ready to receive.
Do you feel like you have their respect to approach those situations? Maybe because you are an outsider, or maybe that you had to earn it even more because you were an outsider? Did it help that you grew up in Venezuela so that you knew the language and were fluent and all that?
Venezuela, less so. Okay. Having any kind of an American influence, more so, to where I feel like I actually had to possibly be a little more careful or restrained in the way I would say things, because there were times, I want them to push back.
Right.
Because there's things, I understand there's things I'm not thinking about. There's things I'm not considering. And I want them to feel completely free in pushing back on something. And let's have that conversation. Right. And too often, I found myself in the situation, well, he's the American, he's a missionary, he's, and they weren't going to push back. And I'm like, no, I'm not, I need to know these things. I need to consider these things, and we're working together. This is a team effort. We need to do our best together. And I'm definitely, but there is a tendency to have that kind of chieftain desire, that who's the guy, who's the one that's going to run the show. Right. And finding the way to have the teamwork, and we're really coming together. We're using all of our strengths to overcome all of our weaknesses that we each have is more of what we're trying to build on. And currently we're doing all kinds of little classes and things to do that same thing.
I wanted to ask you that. What are some of the things that you're doing right now in order to spread the gospel, to build the kingdom in Ecuador? What are some of the things that you and this church are doing?
Well, at the moment, we had a hard lockdown, so we kind of had to put a lot of things on hold. And based on what we, at the moment, our worships are still restricted percentage-wise for the building. And of course, our building, we never got a hard number on what they would consider those percentages to be. So we're just having to do our best and hope that no one gets mad at us. Yeah. And so, but with other events, a lot of it is very much, it's still following through with those that we know from the church, but also we wanted to have those events that break beyond those that we currently know, family members and friends and things like that, and coworkers, and just have, those getting fresh blood, as you might say. And so a lot of that is, we had a young man that was we've been helping go to the preaching school at Quito. Yeah. And he came to an internship, and, together with the youth of the church, kind of, as much as you could in these times, did a VBS and soccer school for community kids, and, got a free space at one of the city parks that had a soccer field he could use, and teaching up the kids, and at the same time getting the parents to register them in and give them permission, and then following up with the parents as well, and having Bible verses for them to learn and memorize. And then at church this past Sunday, they had a special thing that was just for after service, for the kids and everything else, that the parents would come and see their kids appreciated. Yeah, that's neat. And everyone loves that. Everyone loves to see a church that appreciates their children and the youth and the family, and for sure. And so many smaller events like that kind of improvised going on each one, but at the same time, when it comes to the church, that everyone's really wanting some retreats right now. We've done a few lock-ins, and we planned some retreats and had to push them back because of COVID shutdowns and things like that. But everyone's itching for some retreats, and they want to get out to some campground for a Friday night, Saturday. And,
like everybody here is too.
Right. And so we're just, looking for excuses to do that, but at the same time with the need of both, bringing in outsiders, and then also encouraging those within the church, getting us ready to fully embrace those that come in, and all the opportunities that God puts at our door, not let them slip through the cracks.
How has COVID affected the church there? Is it much like here? I mean, what did y'all do as an adjustment during COVID and everything? Because I can imagine that's a scary time for someone like yourself, saying, is all this going to fall apart? We've worked so hard here. I mean, are we going to lose it all? Because I know y'all had even stricter lockdowns in a lot of places here in the United States. So what did y'all do during COVID, and are y'all coming back? Do you feel like you're getting there?
The first few weeks, we weren't sure, is this going to be weeks or is this going to be months? Is it going to be, because it's 15 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had the same thing, 15 days to slow the spread. And it turned out to be a whole lot more.
Yeah.
And so, it being just 15 days, I started, my encouragement was, let's make this, I'd seen a need for more personal responsibility within the household.
Yeah.
A lot of people who came to church and were just expecting the church to do the work.
Okay. Yeah.
So first few weeks, there were a lot of ideas thrown out there, and the one that I pushed, and I think they sort of weren't wanting to push back. It was one of those issues. Mm-hmm. But I said, this is something I think we should try for a bit. And long term, I don't think it'll work, but it was decent for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Is to give them material and stuff to do at home as a family.
Okay.
Have the men step up in church and in family, as a family church kind of thing. Giving the Lord's Supper, giving a Bible study of some sort with, simple verses. And then I also started recording and putting on YouTube a few lessons they could also watch at home for encouragement if they're, wanting a little something more. And, it's the same idea, giving them homework to do with it kind of thing. Right. Let's make this a family thing. And you guys are, really leading your household. But as it seemed, as it became evident that this was going to be a longer thing, and people were going to need more connection to the body,
right?
We did, we started doing Zoom, as everyone else had done Zoom. Mm-hmm. Later on, more recently, we've also been publishing to Facebook Live because we noticed that I had discussed that the options and the problems, everything with other leaders, in the other congregations in town.
Sure.
And it seemed like we were all on the same page, but then, I was thinking possibly that we were going to be behind the curve by the time we started meeting in person, or by the time, the things we were doing. Come to find out, they did not keep up, and we were ahead of the curve, and we were doing nice. Zoom faster when we were when we started meeting before everyone else, and one of the congregations until now has yet to meet since March of 2020.
I was going to say, how long were y'all's doors closed at the church?
Let's see. We're looking from, end of March. So April, May. I want to say 4 or 5 months.
And
completely closed.
And y'all were locked down even at home. Like, for what I understand, you couldn't even leave the house, right?
No. We were allowed to be out. I believe it was from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and that was it.
Okay, so that's when you went to grocery shopping and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And everybody had to get the grocery shopping done in those few hours. Yeah. Any work they're going to do it in those hours. A few things, and if you need to be out at different times, thankfully through friends and members of the church, I was able to get a permit to be out past hours to go deliver food baskets and stuff. As one of the, essentially being called an essential worker.
Yeah, but that's scary, right? I mean, you're thinking, when is this going to end? And I'm basically trapped in my own home. Everything's shut down. Are we going to recover? Are we going to bounce back? So, I thought about that stuff here, but it on a whole different level in Ecuador.
It definitely felt very different. It was just one of these, how did we get here, and what are we going to do?
Well, and then you had some riots and some protests. Was it related to?
Those are actually prior.
Oh, they were prior,
right?
Not after.
So the economy and many lives had already been shaken up from that, because that was 2 weeks where government wasn't shutting you in. It was protesters shutting you in, and they were, it was 3 different interest groups working together to basically shut down the whole country.
Okay.
And it really affected a lot of people's businesses, lives, and everything else already. And right about the time COVID hit was when everyone felt like maybe they were starting to get out of it and finally starting to recover, and then just shut back down again. Yeah. So it definitely hit everyone very hard there. It was long and tough, and I was very worried, but I felt through the Zoom issues and also, taking advantage of taking the baskets. Sometimes they didn't really need the food.
Yeah.
But I needed to
They
take
needed the interaction.
I need to see them.
Yes.
And sneak a little hug if I could. And,
Yeah.
we're pretty confident we're all right. Let's give
Yeah.
but there are just times when people need to see each other, and we need to be around. They need to feel loved in some kind of way. I mean, for the most part, everyone needed those baskets.
Oh, I absolutely bet.
But there were situations in which, might not have been as dire, the food aspect of it, as much as the just getting a reminder that people out there love me, and I'm not alone in this. And so that was a wonderful experience for me. It helped me to also have my own encouragement that I needed to keep things moving. And but yeah, no,
where do things stand today? How's the church doing? How are you doing with all of this?
When we first came out of the lockdown, there was just this excitement for it.
Yeah.
I mean, and we were worried because we're going to get shut down because people are just piling, and
Right.
and we're still social distancing. We weren't at numbers we had, pre-pandemic numbers, but there was definitely this eagerness to get in, and we were pushing boundaries, and we had to open up another room in the back to get some space and things like that. But then they shut us down again.
Okay.
And it was only on weekends because the economy couldn't handle it. I mean, if they were going to shut us down completely, then they
never
knew
recover.
The government didn't even. There was not even an option to provide any kind of help.
Right.
And so they had to leave weekdays open, but they just wanted to get rid of the party scene. Because people they're desperate, and those who don't have other means to get those fulfillments, they were out partying and whatever else. And sure. And the problem there, here you have young kids that live alone. There you have young kids that still live with grandparents in the house. Yeah. Family stays together longer. So you have, these 20-year-olds are going out and partying, and here, certain places in Florida or whatever else, they might say, okay, we'll let them get sick and they're fine because they're not going anywhere else. They're amongst young people. They're sleeping in the same house as their grandparents. And it did make a big difference.
A lot more risk. Yeah.
Right. So they were shutting down the weekends, which shut us down. And they're putting a nighttime curfew, which technically we could have met. We just have to meet way earlier and much faster because everyone had to be in by 9.
Okay.
And it was just not going to work because everyone gets off, they're needing to work. They've just been out of work for so long. They're getting off work around 6 o'clock, and there's no way they're going to come to church, have a decent service and get home by 9 o'clock. And public transportation was shutting down. Not many people have their own cars, and it was complicated. So we were just sticking to Zoom and having to do it that way. But that second lockdown, that second break, I feel killed some of the energy there was.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
At it. And some kept their energy, and others, they've just been connecting through Zoom and just kind of staying that way for now. And I don't know if it's just waiting to see if this thing's actually over, or if they're just kind of like, this is the new normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Who can tell? I mean, same here, you know? So let me ask you this. There may be people who are tuning in who are thinking about mission work, about maybe going to a foreign place and spreading the gospel and doing that as a vocation. What advice would you give to folks that are considering mission work? I think we should all consider mission work. Yeah. You know what I'm getting at. What would you say to those folks who are considering moving off and doing that type of work?
Boy, in the short answer?
Yeah.
Or are we starting another show?
Episode I guess 2. That's another episode, right?
But no, briefly, I would say, for me, growing up in the mission field obviously was a huge influence. But then at a young age, I was both at a Christian school and within a youth group that gave me opportunities for short-term missions, which then led into slightly longer term missions. And, I'd have essentially summer long missions, and those opportunities to me, I feel helped me. Not that they were necessary, because I know there are plenty of people who've done, they've just learned on the field. Right. It's doable. But it helped me, I feel, to kind of get my bearings and to know the way I would like to work, the abilities that I had, understanding a few different cultures and acknowledging my own cultural limitations and then identifying the scriptural aspects of it and seeing the different scriptural problems that are struggled with in different places, because it just, the needs are different everywhere. And I feel like getting those experiences really helps. But for sure, I mean, it's wherever you are, a local work is a mission work in so many ways.
Yes.
And everyone's mission work is also someone else's local work.
Yeah.
And so if you can just keep focused on the Lord's purposes and his people, remembering in the hardest situations that Christ died for Christ died for them, his blood was shed, that they, as much as they might get under your skin, Jesus found a way to give his blood for them. Yeah. And who am I to become an obstacle?
Yeah.
Get myself out of the way so that the gospel can do its work. And I think if you can keep your head on about that, you'll have your struggles. If you're going from Appalachia to Texas, you're still gonna have a difference in cultures. If you can keep your head on about those things, I think you can roll with the punches and work with people just about anywhere.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Rusty. And
My
good luck
pleasure.
to you and your family. Blessings to you and
Thank
Brittany
you.
and Peyton and Lydia and Logan. And thank you all for tuning in. And I will say that if you have a question or a comment, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a question or comment specifically for Rusty, we'll make sure that he gets it. I'm sure he'd be willing to answer any questions you might have. But we thank you so much for tuning in. Rusty, thank you, man. And, wish you safe travels as you go back to Ecuador in a couple weeks or?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So you're going back and, blessings to you in the work there. And thank you all for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.